Hello, class. Welcome to the first installment of my blog 837. This time I want to talk a little bit about community-based forest carbon measurement, and in particular talk a little bit about some of the work we're doing in Indonesia with funding from the U.S. Agency for International Development. We're working on the island of Borneo in the province of Central Kalimantan. This is sometimes called the heart of Borneo, and it's this wonderful tropical rainforest ecosystem that has the largest flowering plant in the world. It has the famous the habitat for the famous orangutan, which is Bahasa for man of the forest. And it has a very unique and important story in terms of climate change and carbon. The tropical forests of Indonesia are some of the highest carbon content forests in the world. It's some of the largest extent of tropical rainforest outside of, say, also the Amazon in Brazil or the Congo Basin in Central Africa. These forests are under a lot of pressure at the moment. At this point in time, there's has been for the last 20 years considerable efforts by the Indonesian government to open up these undisturbed forests for productive purposes. In the early 80s, for instance, there was a large transmigrasi program which was aimed at moving many people, thousands and thousands of people, from the crowded island of Sumatra and the crowded island of Java onto Kalimantan or Borneo. This was followed in the 90s, late 90s, by something called the Mega Rice Project, which was a large government initiative to turn large amounts of the land into rice production for domestic but also for export. And now what we see is a lot of land use change, clearing of forests for the expansion of palm oil production. Palm oil is both a vegetable oil for domestic use, cooking, and also industrial use, but it can also be used as a feedstock for biofuels that at least some people would call renewable biofuels. And in fact, there was a great story that goes that the government of the Netherlands was very interested in moving off of fossil fuels towards renewable fuels, and then supported the production of oil palm for a renewable fuel kind of source of liquid fuel energy, and then lo and behold found out that a lot of the oil production, the palm oil plantations were going in by replacing natural primary undisturbed rainforests. And so in terms of carbon balance, the carbon balance was offset because any gains from using renewables instead of fossil fuels for liquid fuels was completely wiped out by the emissions from clearing of the rainforest. There has been a lot of efforts in recent years to move oil palm production to a sustainable approach. There have been a number of organizations that have formed that have created tools and methods and a general framework for promoting and supporting sustainable palm oil production. There was recently the creation of the Sustainable Oil Palm Roundtable, which is a organization of private companies that have agreed to work toward moving away from unsustainable rainforest impacting oil palm production towards more sustainable means. And there have been a number of efforts, chiefly, for instance, by WWF, to do scorecards on companies as to whether they're using certified sustainable oil palm or not, and they do a lot of reporting and reviewing of both of the industry that uses oil palm, whether it's in a supply chain or whether it's in production of foods for retail or in the food industry or whatever. I'd encourage you to look at the WWF scorecard. I think you'll find some surprising things in there in terms of American companies. Some of the American companies in retail that are doing the very best actually are surprising perhaps to you, like Walmart. And in terms of the food industry, I think you might be surprised that McDonald's is doing a really great job, and it scores very high in terms of the WWF scorecard. McDonald's is moving towards a sustainable approach to sourcing oil from palm oil. And in fact, it's an important player because it is one of the largest in the whole retail sector in terms of its use of oil palm. And so I think you'd benefit from looking at that. But as much as there are some positive things on the horizon, there still is this problem of rainforest being lost to palm oil production. And so one of the things that we're working on the solution side is to work with communities, local communities, forest-dependent communities in Indonesia, in Borneo, trying to enable them and empower them to manage the forests that they have. There has been a move by the Indonesian government to decentralize authority for forest management to the local level. There are a number of community owned and community managed forests that are being titled to communities, and these communities need the tools to measure the biomass, to measure the carbon stocks, and to participate in governance and stewardship of these forests. And so it's an interesting aspect of what we're talking about in this course in terms of measurements, because one of the things that we do in science sometimes, maybe not intentionally, is we kind of adopt a bias thinking that only technical experts are in a position to do these highly technical measurements. Yet, in fact, in this area of climate change mitigation and adaptation, we realize that no, the communities are right there on the ground. They're the front line of conservation and management, and they also can participate in the measurement process and the reporting process. And if by participation in measurement, reporting, and verification, they then become owners of the carbon benefits, credits, if you will, whatever. And yet they need a mechanism and framework for community-based training for carbon measurements. And that's what we're doing with some communities working in Borneo. We work with several of the universities in Central Kalimantan, and most notably the University of Pelangkaraya, where we have a program where we're training the trainers. And what I have here in the following clips from the field is some reporting back from just yesterday, actually, from Jay Samek, who's one of the lead scientists here in my lab, who has been in Indonesia all this week on a short-term assignment for developing some of the training activities, working with communities in the forests of Indonesia. So I want you to take a look at that, and then I'll have a recap at the end and pose a question for discussion in the forum. Okay, so there you go. First entry from blog 837. Signing out for now. Bye.
Hey Dave, this is Jay. I'm here in Borneo, also known as in Indonesia as the island of Kalimantan. And this morning, a group of us took about a 3-hour ride and about a 40-minute boat ride. 3-hour car ride, 40-minute boat ride from the city of Palangkaraya to a small town just to the west of Sabangao National Park. And prior to this, 3 days before, we did a little bit of training with people from Palangkaraya, a forester from the province, and some folks from WWF on doing community carbon measurement and monitoring. And starting today and tomorrow, we'll be working with a village here who has rights to their own community forest, and doing some training with them to lay out plots and take inventory measurements and participate in measuring carbon. So I'll just show you a little bit of the village here for a minute. This is the house that a group of us are going to be staying in. There's a bunch of kids down here, and there in the distance you can see the river, Katinga River, which again we took a 40-minute boat ride downriver south to this small village here. It's got a nice little boardwalk along all the houses and everything. And tomorrow I'll do a little bit more videotaping when we're out in the field doing some measurements. All right. Dave, you can see here a huge plantation of oil palm, and just drove through that, and we're headed off, and you can see in the distance there the forest. That's the community forest, and we'll be taking some measurements of trees, setting up a handful of plots. This is part of the training of community carbon measurement and monitoring.
Maksudnya kan kekawalan tuh pelatihan gitu, harapannya teh tahu membentuk izin di kekawalan, tahu menempah plot, yo 20 atau 10 atau 5 saya pengukuran nanti sederhana mungkin kita tahu menghitung. Jadi kalian mungkin bapak.
Okay, Dave, I'm here inside the forest now. This is part of the forest concession, and as I mentioned yesterday, this is on the island of Kalimantan in the province of Central Kalimantan. And we're working on a training program to train community members to be able to measure and monitor their own carbon. So we had a series of days where we trained trainers from the university, a couple universities. We trained a few individuals from WWF who work in this village and have been for about 5-6 years now. And they are working to train 5 community members to lay out a plot. So we'll do 2 plots today here and demonstrate the measurements to take on the trees, how to lay out the plot, and then take them back and compute the carbon in these plots so that they can understand the full end process for it. We're just doing the above ground biomass. As you know, this is a peat forest area, so the peat soils are very rich and have high contact and soil organic carbon, but we're going to begin the training with just being able to measure trees, the DBH and the height, using an allometric equation to then compute the above ground biomass and the carbon in the living biomass above ground. So let me flip you around here and I'll just show you what's going on. You can see the forest. We're about 50 meters in from the edge of where an oil palm plantation starts. And there's a group of our trainers that are training 5 of the community members. That's the group from WWF and Muhammadiyah University, University of Palangkaraya, and also the USAID Lestari program. And here's a couple of the students, 4 of the students from the university, and a member from the Provincial Forestry Department. Setting up some lines to be able to do 3, 4, 5 measurements for a 90-degree angle that communities can do without having to own a compass or purchase a compass, as well as setting these lines out to lay out the plot. And a few other folks here who have been part of the training. You can see this is kind of a secondary forest. Again, it's right just 50 meters in from the edge of where this oil palm plantation is. You may be able to see that there's a tree up there that is pretty large through there. A couple other medium-sized trees, but a lot of smaller young growth going on in here. And again, we'll do 2 plots. One is a demonstration where the people I trained, the trainers, will demonstrate for the 5 community members how this is done, and they'll link up with each of the trainers to understand the techniques. And then we'll move a distance away to create a second plot where the community members will lay it out with supervised guidance from the trainers. This is a community forest area where they now have legal status. It's actually 5 villages that are cooperating to manage this area. And it's a total of about 4,500 hectares, surrounded, at least on the way in, by kilometers, hundreds, thousands, maybe 1,000 hectares of oil palm plantations. So you can imagine a place like this has just been completely transformed to oil palm as we drove in. All right, signing out from Borneo, from Kalimantan, the province of Central Kalimantan, about 4 hours away from the provincial capital of Palangkaraya, inside of a community forest where they're beginning to learn how to take measurements of trees to compute carbon. All right, bye.
Okay, so thanks, Jay, for that great report from the field just yesterday. I want to leave you guys, the rest of the class, with some thoughts. Clearly, you can see that communities are being engaged for carbon measurement and for carbon management, particularly in community-based natural resource management schemes in their own community forests, as we saw here in Indonesia. There's a need for training. There's a model that we use where we train trainers. In other words, we work directly with the universities and other organizations like NGOs like WWF that are on the ground in the country. And we work to develop a curriculum and train the trainers at these universities and NGOs on the basic methods for carbon measurement, specifically adapted to the community scale and for use by communities as opposed to technical experts. And then that group of trainers can go out into the field and do a lot more training to more people and begin to engage the communities. So, this is measurement at the grassroots. I mentioned earlier that there's a lot of interest at the level of these large international corporations in climate change mitigation, moving towards more sustainable oil palm production systems and things like that. And even those organizations, as big as they are, will have to do basic measurements in order to track their progress and their success. When they go towards certification programs where they're intending to purchase through their supply chain only certified sustainable palm oil. It's a measurement question. And so at all ends of the scale, from the large international organizations, national governments, all the way down to communities, measurements are important. And it's this multi-stakeholder, multi-level aspect of measurement that is particularly interesting, but also particularly difficult in many respects, because there's so many different stakeholders and players and actors that are involved at different scales and through different jurisdictions and so forth. So give that some thought, and one of the things that I'd like you to think a little bit about is how can you take highly technical information that we have off the shelf or out of the laboratory, so to speak, and make it not just basic science but actionable science, and putting the measurement techniques and protocols and methods in the hands of community folks that are living in these forested areas and are forest-dependent communities, in fact. How can they be engaged more and more in the measurement process? And to what degree do you think they can be engaged in the measurement process? And put some of your thoughts down in the forum, and I'll weigh in with some ideas and once the discussion gets going. Okay. Well, signing off then, and that's our first blog entry. Look for more as they occur. All right. Thanks. Bye.